Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Tampa Bay History Center's signature lecture series, Florida Conversations. This program is free and open to the public thanks to support of the University of South Florida Endowment, USF Libraries, AAR Tampa Bay, and a generous gift from Shelley Blood. I would like to welcome our virtual audience. During the presentation, we invite you to use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask any questions you may have. We'll have time at the end of the program for questions. In this afternoon's presentation, the History Center's Rodney Kite-Powell, Director, Touchton Map Library, will be engaging Donna Piñero with her recent memoir, Work, War, Wit, Wisdom, Lessons and Legacies from Ybor City. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Kite-Powell.
Thank you so much, and that's Amanda Hoffman, our Director of Education. She did not introduce herself, but I want everybody to know Amanda. She'll be behind the scenes with the Zoom questions. So for those of you who are watching live at home, we'll make sure we get your questions addressed in those here. At the end of my part of the questions, if anybody in the audience has a question, just please allow me to bring the mic, or somebody else on staff to bring the mic to you so you can ask the question in the microphone. That way the folks who are watching at home, either live or when this is up on the website, can hear the question. So before we get started, I know both Donna and I want to recognize somebody who cannot be here with us, but who is actually going to be the one to lead this Q&A with Donna, and that's Andy Hughes, longtime friend of the History Center, passed away about 7 weeks ago now, and he was just a monumental figure in local history, and even though he's not here physically, he will always be with us with his legacy, for time, moving on. So I don't know if you want to say something too about Andy.
I say amen to that about Andy, and I also want to acknowledge and thank Andy and you, Rodney, for the opportunity to have my publication in the Tampa Bay History Journal. If I may, I'd like to ask, raise your hands if you're a native of Tampa. Okay, so got a mix. Okay. Sort of. Oh, yeah, I think so. We'll let you in. Okay.
So, and Donna, thank you for mentioning Tampa Bay history. So, Florida Conversations is something that we do in partnership with USF. Been doing this for, I believe, 25 years now, which is kind of amazing to think about. But the other thing that we do in partnership with USF is we have a scholarly journal called Tampa Bay History. It was originally started by the USF History Department in the 1970s. It was sunsetted by the department in the late 1990s, and we picked it up, I think, in 2008. And this issue, which actually I have here printed, is the first digitally native edition that we have of the journal. It's available through USF's website, Scholar Commons, as well as, I believe, the Tampa Bay History Center's website, which is tampabayhistorycenter.org. But because it is digital, I printed it out, which everybody can do as a PDF, but it's a way for it to reach a much, much larger audience. And so, without any other delay, we will get started with our conversation. So, what Work, War, Wit, and Wisdom is Donna's memoir. And probably the best question to ask at the very beginning is, what prompted you to write a memoir?
Well, I didn't sit down one day and decide I'm going to write my memoir. That's not what happened. What happened was I responded to a call for the readers of Legacies to send in, hi Liana, to send in stories about their Nochebuena or other Christmas celebrations. So I thought, well, I've got a story. So I wrote it up and I sent it, and it was in the paper, came out along with many others. And so the following year, I had another Nochebuena story, and I wrote it. And my parents really liked it. My parents really liked sitting down and reading. And so it got me to thinking. I thought, well, this is a nice thing to do. And there's stories in the family. We all have stories in our families, don't we? And so I wrote more stories. Some were published in Legacies, and some weren't. And after a while, I had this collection of stories, and I thought, about this time, grandchildren are starting to appear. And I thought, this is nice to have for my grandchildren. So I put them in chronological order, and then I thought, I've got to give it context. It's got to have the context of what was going on in Ybor City and the whole background. So I gave it context, and then I realized, I've got a memoir here. Then that's kind of how it happened. It just evolved.
And of course, you mentioned Ybor City, and that's the one thing we actually haven't mentioned is you grew up in Ybor City. Mm-hmm. And just as a little bit of historic context, Ybor City is Tampa's Latin Quarter. It is the place where the cigar industry was born, and that actually occurred 140 years ago. Is this month, 140 years ago, when Vicente Martinez Ybor purchased the 40 acres of land that became Ybor City, and then next April we will be celebrating the 140th anniversary of the very first cigar rolled in an Ybor City cigar factory. And that, in the 1880s, is what really brought modern Tampa to existence, along with the railroad and the shipping industry. But what set Ybor and then Tampa apart was this influx of Spaniards and Cubans and Sicilians into a very southern town. And it created a multicultural environment really like no other in the South, and really few other cities in the country. And it had its heyday in the 1920s. And I'm getting my question. Gary Mormino, who is a historian of Florida history and has written quite a bit about Ybor City, he wrote one of the forwards in your book along with Andy and with E.J. Celsinas, so kind of a powerful lineup of forward writers. But Gary said in his forward, one of the things is, while most historians write about that golden age of Ybor City, the 1890s through the 1920s, when it was really the first, second, and the beginnings of the third generation coming in, but it was a very strong city, bringing a lot, or section of the city bringing a lot of money in, but also the culture was so rich at that time. But you grew up, and of course, write about what he termed, and you said, maybe Renee Gonzalez said, that was the golden sunset of the community, because you saw kind of the tail end of that and, of course, the beginnings of urban renewal. But how would you describe the Ybor City of your youth?
Well, I grew up in, I'd say, late 40s and 1950s and 60s. I was a teen. There were no wars. War was over. It was peacetime. There was prosperity. The post-war boom. From the post-war boom, people, workers, were able to have paid vacations for the first time. So that was exciting. People were venturing beyond Tampa to explore the country. The strikes were over because the cigar industry was waning. So it was kind of a placid time, and it was a golden sunset because the roof was about to cave in with urban renewal and the creation of I-4. So there was a little window there when it was just very placid and very nice.
So going into that a little bit, so what was the effect that you experienced with urban renewal in the interstate? So what did you see as far as how that changed Ybor City?
Tractors. There were tractors all over Ybor, bulldozers all over the city. And people were just astonished how they were destroying houses left and right. They bisected Ybor because it came, where I-4 is, that it came through there. I had a dressmaker. She was a retired cigar worker. She and her husband were retired cigar workers. They lived on 10th Avenue. Her house was between my school at OLPH and my house. And my mother would buy me fabric at El Gatico, which Little Cats in Ybor City that was owned by the Katz family, part of the Jewish influx that came from Romania and other parts of Eastern Europe. So she would buy me fabric there, and Blanca Vega was her name. Her husband's name was Jose Vega. And she would make me dresses for very little money, between what my mother paid for the fabric and the $4 or $5 we paid Blanca. I had a dress for less than $10, and it was a lot less, more affordable than Moss Brothers. So when the urban renewal came, the Vegas were told that they had to leave their house. So they were retirees. She was 75. I remember that. And so they were told they had to leave their house. They had borrowed money from the federal government in the 20s to build this house. And now in the 60s, the federal government was telling them they had to vacate. And the night before they were supposed to leave, she kept on saying, no puedo, I can't. And she had a heart attack and died. And that was a casualty. That really was a casualty of that awful era. I think there were altogether about 1,200 structures that were destroyed. When you looked across Ybor, it looked like a moonscape. Now, historic buildings were spared, and the buildings on 7th Avenue and a little bit beyond that some of those were spared, so everything wasn't completely leveled. Thank goodness that those were retained. But in front of my house, on the corner of Columbus Drive and 14th Street, there was a big billboard, advertisers advertised. And every year when we were kids, long about, I don't know, I guess maybe early November, the billboard would be Santa Claus. It would be Santa Claus. It was a Coca-Cola ad. And it was Santa drinking a Coke, and it was always, with his red suit. It was beautiful. And we loved it because we knew, my friends and I knew, that Christmas was near because there's the billboard. So one year, the billboard didn't go up, and then we knew that something was up. And eventually, the skeleton of the framework of the billboard collapsed. And it just was symbolic for me of it's gone.
That's really telling. So you are among the first for Tampa memoir writers to be a woman. Most of those who have written their memories of Ybor City in particular were men, and a lot of the stories that we get about Ybor, again I mentioned Mr. Ybor himself, is from that male perspective. But Sarah McNamara and others are starting writing about women in Ybor City. But from your perspective, who were some of the more influential women in Ybor City's history? And it can be personal, it can be your own family, but it can be
sure.
others that you have experienced in Ybor's past.
Yeah, I thought women were very formidable. They were the backbone. Ybor worked. Ybor flourished because women kept everything going. In the earlier days, the cigar makers, the men, would go to their clubs after having dinner at home that was cooked by the wife, who had also come home from work and had whipped up dinner. And they would go to their clubs to sit and discuss politics and play dominoes. But the women kept things going, and I thought people need to think about what the role of women was. And I'm not talking about cigar owner wives. I'm talking about rank and file. My grandmothers were rank and file. And so when they left the factory, and by the way, when my mother and my mother had 3 brothers, but one little one. The other 2 were older, and they were kind of off working. But when my mother and her little brother got up in the morning, my grandmother had left oatmeal for them. I imagine by that time it was cold, but they ate the oatmeal. But my grandmother, when my uncle was littler, she would come home at lunchtime, and she wasn't the only one. This was what was done to nurse him, to breastfeed him, and to whip up a little lunch for my mom and herself. There was a lady that lived upstairs that kind of looked after the kids while she was at work. So it was the daily life of the rank and file women was a lot of work after work. Because after dinner, there was children to see to their baths, there was clothes to be mended, there was always some ironing to do. And then on the weekends, it was on Saturdays, it was a wash day. The first thing, wash. In my grandmother's day, it was what do they call that? The washboard. It was the washboard and boiling the clothes to get them clean. Later, big deal when the washing machines came. My mother bought a wringer washer, which you had to be careful with your fingers. My godparents and my grandparents lived in the same house. They went directly from washboard to automatic washer. And neighbors came. Neighbors came to see the demonstration of the new washer that was making life easier for women. My mother told me they scrubbed the wood floors on Saturdays. Occasionally, there would be families, and I don't know if hers was included, but they'd have to take the bed outside to douse it with kerosene to kill bed bugs, because it was kind of rampant in the swampy areas of Tampa. So life was harsh for those women, and I thought I need to pay tribute. Now you asked me who I looked up to. Well, my mom worked. My grandmothers worked. My godmother worked at Tropical Garment that was owned by the Kotler family, and there's not been much written about the Kotler family. There needs to be. That was a wonderful place. They had a sewing room, of course. They made men's pants and shorts under the Royal Palm label, and she worked there. Started as a seamstress. She started the same day that Arnold Kotler returned from World War II. They started together, and she became the supervisor of the manager of the sewing room. So these were all women that I looked up to. Of course, Adela was royalty of Ybor, and so was a lady named Molly Ferreira, who had what was the name of it? Columbia Music. Yes. Columbia Music. And she was an active businesswoman, so was Adela, in the Ybor Chamber. And they were glass ceiling breakers, yeah.
Fantastic. So, as I mentioned, Ybor City was unusual in that you had Spaniards, you had Cubans, you had Afro-Cubans, you had Sicilians, and of course there's kind of native-born whites and native-born blacks. And so all these different people, we look back and we think that there was a lot of kind of racial harmony. We, of course, know that the Civil Rights Movement kind of needed to exist because there was segregation and there was racism at the time as well. What were your experiences kind of dealing with all these different ethnic groups and kind of witnessing, you told me a story earlier, kind of witnessing segregation as it was playing out?
I think that early on, when I was really a young kid and didn't know about the Civil War and didn't know about slavery, I was just baffled with this white and colored bathrooms and fountains. I just didn't understand it, And one day, I lived across the street from Cascaden Park, and it was a wonderful park. There were two city parks and recreation directors there, Mr. Andres Espolita and Miss Viola Mexico. That was her name, and she was from North Dakota. And I don't know how she ended up in Tampa, but she was very kind very nice. Anyway, so I was at the park. I must have been maybe 9 years old, and 2 or 3 girls, we were talking with Miss Mexico. And here come these 2 or 3 or 4 little black boys. They must have been 5 or 6. And they went up to Miss Mexico and they said, "Hi, we want to play. Can we have some balls?" And Miss Mexico was beside herself because she had to tell him, "I'm so sorry, honey, but you can't. You have to leave the park." She was very upset, and we didn't like it either. This is kind of crazy. These little kids just want to play here. So that was not a pleasant experience. But you mentioned the diversity, and as EJ often says, there were various languages spoken in the sidewalks of Ybor City because Romanian Jews mostly, but other parts of Eastern Europe as well, came to escape pogroms and a harsh treatment there. They would come to New York, and their custom was to get on the train and ride to the end of the terminus of the train, and that's where they would settle. And so many got on the train, and the terminus was Tampa, and so they came to Tampa. And there was a cigar industry here, and there certainly was a need for dry goods. So they had the department stores, and I mentioned Little Cats, a clothing store, hat stores. Max Argentar was one of the ones that lasted the longest in Ybor City. That was a very fine men's haberdashery. So there was, their language was spoken in Ybor City, although they learned Spanish. They learned Spanish because they were business people, and they knew that they had to serve their customers, so they had to learn Spanish. And Spanish was the lingua franca of Ybor City. My husband's grandmother was trilingual. She spoke some English, and she spoke some Spanish, and of course she spoke Sicilian. So, and I think, getting back to the whole race thing, I like to think that because from its very beginnings, Tampa was very multicultural, very multinational, it certainly stymied in some ways. It stymied Jim Crow because we weren't a typical Southern black-white town. We were a mix. And so I think it kind of deflated Jim Crow a little bit. And I like to think that we have a wonderful community here in Tampa where we respect differences. I like to think it's because it's from way back.
So you tell a lot of stories in your memoir. I'm actually looking at the table of contents. Every chapter is basically its own story. Just if you could share with us, what are your favorite kind of 1 or 2 stories in here? I think my favorite is your cross-country trip, but what would be your kind of 1 or 2 favorite stories you tell in the memoir?
I like the prologue. I like the story in the prologue is that there was a ritual that took place at my grandparents' / godparents' house on 12th Street. I was there often because it was only 3 or 4 blocks from my house. Everybody lived close together, family. And so I used to go there on Saturday late mornings. And so this ritual took place late morning, early afternoon. Now, Ybor City was planned with alleys, and all the alleys run east and west. And my grandparents' house faced west, so there was an alley flanking the house on the south side. So this is what took place on Saturdays. They would be on the lookout, the 4 of them. They would be on the lookout or to hear the garbage truck that was going to come down at the other end of the alley. And when they heard it, or they saw it, they put the pot on the stove. My grandmother put the pot on the stove to make Cuban coffee. And by the time that the garbage truck had gotten to their house, was there at the other end of the alley, the coffee was ready. And they poured it into little demi-tasse cups, and of course with a saucer. And my godfather would unlatch the screen and lift it up, and he'd hand these little demi-tasses of espresso, café solo, to the 3 garbage men. And I got to tell you, the garbage trucks then were open. So one of the fellas was standing with long, big rubber boots, was standing in the middle of the garbage, and there he is with his pinky up, drinking café solo. And I like that story, and I picked it for my prologue because it speaks to the universality of the working class. Universality. We are all in this together. And it also has the component of the Cuban coffee, which was universal also in Ybor. And nowadays, people drink water at breakfast or during the day, or they drink smoothies or a protein drink or tea. Not always coffee, but in Ybor, everybody drank coffee. And I like that story because it was fun to look at the 3 men. And also, who pays attention? We pay attention, but how many of us pay attention to people that serve us? Cashiers, the garbage collectors, people that are helping us live better lives. So I kind of like that story.
Yeah, it was a great way to kick off the book. So I definitely want to have time for the audience to ask questions. And so my last formal question is, you wrote this, you said, for your grandchildren. What do you hope that they and others who read this take away from what you wrote, from your life and your memoir?
Every country and every culture has stories. It's universal. And people like stories. Some cultures have just an oral tradition like Native Americans, but others write it down. And I hope that my memoir will encourage more people to write stories. Rodney, you're from Tampa. You grew up here and went to Plant High School. You have stories that you could write. So that's one of the things that I hope will come out of this.
Marvelous. Do we have any questions, either from you all in the audience or from our folks online? It looks like maybe we do, at least in the audience. Let me hand this to Amanda. Well, y'all can take some questions.
Is there anything that you did not include in your memoir that you wish you would have?
I have thought of a few minor things that I haven't included. Jack's Cookies came to mind. I wanted to put something about Jack's Cookies because Jack's Cookies was a local company that made cookies, and you could go to Jack's Cookies and you could buy for very little money bags of broken cookies that they weren't putting in the supermarkets. You remember that? Yeah. So just little things like that like pop up, and I think, oh, I should have put that in there, but nothing major. And by the way, when you're writing a memoir, you don't have to tell all. I didn't tell all. I didn't tell all.
So there were some stories in there that you didn't tell.
For another era, I guess. You don't have to tell all. You can pick and choose the stories you want to tell. But the important thing is to get some of them down for posterity.
Anything in the audience that's here with us? Oh, all right. Hang on one second. Let me get the microphone to you, and then we can.
Congratulations on the book, Donna. I haven't read it yet, but I promise you that I will.
Okay.
Do you remember, I've been asked this question many times, so I thought I'd ask you. Do you remember political discussions in your house between the generations, like your father and your grandfather, et cetera?
You know, I was always around my family because I didn't have brothers and sisters, so I was there in the thick of things. And I remember my mother's two brothers arguing with my grandfather who was from Spain. He was from Galicia. And I remember them having political discussions. And I think it had to do with Franco. I think it had to do with Franco. And I don't know who sided with what, but there was some heated discussions there. That's when my grandfather once says, "Ustedes son unos cabezas de burros." You all are donkey heads. He got really fed up with the discussion. Yeah, there were some discussions. Mostly there was agreement. My father and mother were avid Tampa Tribune, La Gaceta, and La Traducción readers. And they rarely agreed with the Tampa Tribune editorials. So there was discussion, but it was a harmonious discussion.
I came to Tampa in 1950 from a small town in upstate New York.
Okay.
And to attend the University of Tampa.
Uh-huh.
And I was so thrilled to see all this sunshine, no snow to shovel, and it was just a wonderful experience. And found out about Ybor City, and they had all those nice stores.
They did?
And whenever we had somebody to drive us, we'd go to Ybor City and get material and make dresses and things for the.
And there was a store called Wolfson's that sold notions, buttons of all kinds, and trim and lace trim or sequin trim, the trimmings to put on your fancy dresses.
There, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
Is that still there?
I don't think Wolfson's exists anymore. No, it closed.
But anyway, one of the stories, I was on the newspaper staff, and they were having a meeting from all the different schools in the state at the University of Tampa, and they gave us tickets to go to the movies and do different things with the donated, to the kids at the school. And we had some from Florida A&M and Bethune-Cookman. We went to the theater downtown, and they wouldn't let the black students in. We all went back to the university. None of us would go in because we felt it was so unfair.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a wonderful experience at the university at that era. Our dormitories were in Plant Hall. We all slept in Plant Hall.
And no air conditioning, right?
No air conditioning.
Yeah.
No heat either.
Oh, no heat?
We had a big, one of those stoves in the middle of the
space heater.
And the man used to come in and put the wood in the stove in the morning, and somebody would holler, "Man on the floor," because the girls are all running around in their nightgowns and whatever.
That's a nice story. That's a nice story about Tampa. You mentioned the Tampa Theater, and so I have memories of the Tampa Theater. My parents, my father did not like musicals. He only liked dramas or cowboy movies, war movies. So I had to go with my parents and sit through a lot of James Mason and Dana Andrews and all these Gary Cooper movies. And I would roam around the theater, kind of exploring. But when we were going to go downtown, my father would pull me aside and say, we're going to go downtown. We're going to go to the Tampa Theater. In Spanish, he would tell me, speak softly and speak English. Yeah. So I had this sense, I didn't know the word mainstream, but I had this sense that we weren't in it, that, you know, we had a different language and different customs, different food, and so I knew we weren't mainstream, and I knew that when we went downtown, it was different than Ybor. Yeah, you had to dress up to go to the movies. That's right. You didn't show up in shorts. Yeah.
We have a question. Yeah, we have a question from our online audience. She says, "Hi. The title of your book mentions lessons and legacies.
Yeah.
What lesson from Ybor's past do you think is most relevant to Tampa's younger generation today?"
Oh, that's a good question. What lesson from Ybor was relevant today? Well, okay. When I walked 9 blocks to school from my house to OLPH, Our Lady of Perpetual Help, I would pass the porches, I would pass houses, people are sitting on their porches, they're retired cigar makers. And I knew that I didn't know who they were, but I knew that I had to greet them, buenos dias, because they didn't know my name, but they knew me by provenance. They knew I was so-and-so's granddaughter. They knew I was so-and-so's niece. I was so-and-so's daughter. They knew who I was. And so I had to be on best behavior because, yes, the word would get back. You know, there's not an impolite child in your family. It would get back to my family. So that's one lesson of where has politeness gone? Where has politeness gone? We need to be a little more civil and respectful, I think. So another thing, and I write about it, and when I was a preteen, telephones were new, believe it or not. I remember when my mother went to get me at school and would walk me home when I was, I don't know, 6 or 7. And she says, we have a surprise at home. And can you guess what it is? And I'm thinking, a pony, because I wanted a pony. No, it's not a pony. And it was a telephone. We had a telephone, and the number was 270-574. And so telephones were a big deal. So by the time I was a preteen, more people had phones, and we thought it would be a fun joke to use the phone for calling people and joking. Of course, there was no caller ID. So, hey, you called somebody and then you hung up or whatever. So we would call, and, you know, is your refrigerator running? No, well, you better run after it and catch it, the old joke. So one day we got the brilliant idea of calling a restaurant and ordering half a dozen Cuban sandwiches as soon as possible. And then we just laughed and laughed, just laughed and laughed. And so then we thought, well, maybe we ought to be careful who we tell. Be careful who we tell this to, because this community, everybody knows everybody. So we shared it with this one fella, René Rigo, and his father had a little grocery store. We shared that with him. Well, come to find out, the owner of the store was his aunt. And so the phone rings at my house, and my mother answers it. And when I heard her say, "Don't tell me," I knew I was in trouble. As a lady from the restaurant called my mother to tell her what I had done. So then there was a parental tribunal that evening. My mother and father deliberated, and they got this punishment a month, and I can't do this and I can't do that. And so that was a little hardship there, no telephone. And so then the final coup de grace was marching to the restaurant with my mother, and I had to apologize to the lady. So that was a big lesson for me that at least living in Ybor, there was an intimacy, and there was a wonderfulness to the intimacy, but Everybody knew. There were very few secrets. So that was a lesson that I learned in Ybor. And for people today, there's so much anonymity, isn't there? It's good, perhaps, to live in a smaller area where people are watching young people.
Which is the very fact that you're on your porch. And so, I think we've lost the front porch.
Yeah.
And so we're inside behind anonymous phones now that do have caller ID, but also can send out all kinds of anonymous things. So that community, I think, is what really capture in your memoir.
Yeah.
And that's something that would be good for us to maybe try and recapture. So
Well,
that's a good lesson.
the houses were close together. There's no air conditioning. You have to have the windows up. So if you had a family secret that you had to talk about, you better talk it in sotto voce because the neighbors could hear. And of course, where did all the gossip get disseminated? In the men's barber shops. In the men's barber shops. My uncles, my father, when they come home and they'd powwow with my mother and tell her the latest gossip.
That's fantastic. Well, so we have reached the end of our time, but people who hear about this can certainly watch what we just did on the computer. You can also, the important thing is access the most recent edition, 2025 edition of Tampa Bay History, and they can read your memoir. So they can go to the USF website, USF Library's website, Scholar Commons, TampaBayHistoryCenter.org, I believe, also has a link to it.
But you can also just Google the name,
And
the
you
title.
you can just look up Tampa Bay History as the journal. So I hope everybody does that. Thank you so much for
Fun.
writing
It was
this
fun.
and then for chatting about it with us.
It was fun.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much
Thank
for
you for
coming.
having me. Thank you for coming.